Hi, this is Dennis, Second Chance Tackle. Today we're going to work on a reel that Chris sent in. It's a third generation, or second, depending on how you like to count them, Penn Spinfisher. So you had the early ones, the greenies, which were the 700 series, and then you went to the 700Zs, which was the black and gold, but essentially the same reel. And then Penn switched their design, and they came out with the 450 series, in this case, the 450 series, or third generation. I think it's third. Sometimes it's called second. The 450 SS, the SS stands for skirted spool. That means that the spool comes over the top of the rotor. It's unlike earlier generations. Now, this is not a Penn Spinfisher, but this is the earlier generations where the spool was seated inside the rotor cup. So they switched over to an exterior mounted spool, and that's all good because as the water would drain off of the line, it ran down the outside and did not come into the inside of the reel. Well, Chris sent this one in because there is no anti-reverse, and he's given me some speculation in terms of what he thinks it is, and speculation is good, but we're going to see exactly what it is as we go about doing this. So this video is really about problem diagnosis and repair. I probably won't service the whole reel, but I have other videos in my library that show you how to service this generation of reel. And if you're interested in a full service, if I don't get to it here, you'll be able to do it there. But surprisingly, I got to take every piece and part off kind of the same way as I would if I did repair the whole thing. So we'll comment along the way about how to do the servicing. And the first thing you do is you remove the exterior pieces and parts, like that spool. And when I do that, I like to put those into a parts tray. I use the bottom of a plastic jug. I also like to wear a protective glove while I do that, in case there's any oils or greases in there that I don't want to get on my hands. So I'll go do that now. And I tend to buy them by the boxes, and recommend that you do the same if you work on a lot of fishing reels. Well, as I take these parts off, I want to thank our first responders, our essential personnel, and everybody who's got a role in keeping us safe during the pandemic. They are our hometown heroes. You know who they are. If you are one, thank you for everything you're doing. If you know one, please thank them, and appreciate everything they do day in, day out to make this a safer place. All right, 3 side plate screws is going to help you remove the side plate. That's got a bearing in it. Then we may or may not be able to remove this main gear. Sometimes this interferes with it. But in order to remove that main gear, you got to remove the 2 screws on the crosswind. They attach to a flat plate, and that flat plate is holding in a slot on the axle, and it kind of pins the crosswind into the back. Make sure you're on the bottom of the stroke when you do this. It makes it easier to get access to the screws. If you can't see the screws, just rotate the rotor or turn the reel a couple of turns, and it will back it down because that's your oscillation mechanism. All right, we're going to remove the top of the axle shaft. Hopefully we should be able to remove this now. Yeah, so there's a little cutout in this this bar here, and that enables you to get the rest of that main gear out. Looks like Chris has done a lot of work on this already because that's fresh grease, and we can kind of move on. You'll see a second bearing here, and the third bearing will be up top. Remove that crosswind block. Notice how it's tucked underneath. This is a good place to tell you to take pictures along the way. Make sure that you know where that orientation is, how this sits up, and how it is oriented, so that when you go to reinstall, if you have a question, you can go back and reference your pictures. You can also reference the schematic for the reel. This one was available at mysticparts.com, and it'll show you what we're working on. So we have an issue with the anti-reverse. That anti-reverse has got an override system below, a little spring that holds it up top there, and then when you move inside the reel, you'll see that there's some dogs and the like up top, and we're going to open them up right now and we'll show you. These are your anti-reverse points. Always a good pictorial or a reference point for that. Okay, I'm just looking for a wrench. I probably should have put it out ahead of time, but that's kind of me. You should be able to get this with an opening wrench. If you don't, then you can. I love these offset wrenches. It's just enough to get over the lip of these rotors. But you could use a deep socket if you don't have that to get off. Now I take these off fairly quickly, but there's no awards for speed. All right, so we have a friction-led anti-reverse dog here. Now when I turn this, that dog should flip back, and it doesn't. So what that means is that we have a worn fork. So sometimes it's necessary to replace this, but most of the time you can simply pinch that back together. So let's take the dog off. You do that by removing the screw that's holding the dog in, and then you can remove the dog, and you can remove the click ratchet. Now you'll see just by looking at this that there's way too much of a gap there. There's no friction, and this is a friction-driven clutch. So simply take a pair of pliers and pinch it in. Now you don't have to touch them all the way, just restore the tension to that spring. You can imagine what it's been like. This thing is probably a 20-year-old reel, and it's been working overtime. Every time that piece spins around, it kind of wears down on it, and it loses its tension. It's just a simple spring. If you pinch it like that, just go ahead and put it back together and feel the tension on it. I've got the tension there now. Got it the wrong ways, but I have the tension. And we can go ahead and reinstall, but let's go ahead while we have the reel out. We'll show you how the rest of the reel is done. We're going to take off this collar so that we can remove the shaft and the bearing. And I'm assuming that Chris has pretty much done all of this. Even though this wants to fall down, it goes through the top. You can remove it from the bottom, that way everything out, but that's your assembly. So while we have this out, we want to check to make sure that the override is working, and that's doing what it should do. It's if you have this apart and you're wondering where it goes, the one tag end of the spring is here. The other tag end is on a 90-degree angle, and it goes up inside this case. So if you've had it off, you have to load it into that piece first, and to do that you have to remove the bottom swing arm here. Once you do that, you'll be able to raise this entire assembly up. You'll put that tag end of the spring into this body, then you'll load this side in and press the whole thing down while turning. All right, well, this I just wanted to show you is how this is set up. There's another collar or bushing, then there's the bearing, and then there's your pinion gear. So let's go ahead, do a little grease on that. And we'll put that back in. Again, if you weren't paying attention, you may have missed how the orientation went, and you'd have to come back and look at your pictures. I'm going to oil that bearing while I'm at it. And we have that collar, and that collar goes away. That's only a semicircle collar because it doesn't want to interfere with the override mechanism here. So the fellows who designed this knew what to do there. So if you like these kinds of videos, if you want to learn a little bit about what goes wrong with reels and how to repair them, how to diagnose them, it's really a process of elimination, and you start with the obvious ones, and then you kind of work your way around. Chris was telling me that he thought that maybe it was in the swing arm, maybe that wasn't moving inside the reel. Well, it was, but that's okay. You got to start somewhere and try and draw your conclusions. Now this is the next part that goes on, because if you weren't paying attention, you have to know which way that spike goes, and you have to know where that lines up. So I'm just going to pause this for a moment. I got a little call coming in, and I will come right back. I usually ignore those calls, but I know that number. Okay, so as I mentioned, you want to pinch this down. You can see now that the gap is less than the width of the dog, even though they're not touching. That's going to restore it, and that thing's going to last for years. It's kind of funny like that. It's just a piece of spring metal, but as I mentioned, it does wear with time. Now you want to get your orientation correct. You want to slide the back end in, and then you want to make sure that as you do this, you're in the right position with that anti-reverse dog, which is where the beak of the anti-reverse dog is going to catch the hook on that cog. All right, let's go ahead and do a couple of things here. You have squared shoulders there and here. Hold that gear so that it doesn't push down. Set the shoulders first and then rotate so that you can align that anti-reverse dog with the hole for that screw. Just like that. Let's go ahead and grab the screw. Now that's a shoulder, so you got to kind of work that the hole in there to align properly. Tighten that down. And we should have an anti-reverse now. I'm going to spin it this way. You'll see it runs free because it's going to bump up against here. And then when I turn it backwards, it should set. So let's go ahead and do that. We're turning it to the right. And now as we pull back, your anti-reverse dog comes in. So that's the issue here. And if you have a reel that's not performing properly, take a look at what the components are and then see if that can help you work. In this case, we're going to use the override now. I'm going to flip the lever, and you'll see as I turn the cog, when I go to backspin it, I can't because this is holding the arm out. So you won't have an anti-reverse in that mode. So everything's working properly here now. And let's go ahead and rebuild that reel then. And again, I noticed that Chris has done all the work on this. I'll put some fresh grease on here. That would be your next step in rebuilding this reel. You want to check the teeth. If you haven't done this, check the teeth. Both the front and the back. The back is going to drive the oscillation gear. You want to make sure that that's correct. And get a good amount of grease in there. I didn't take the oscillation gear out. You can. If you're servicing the reel, you're going to take that out. You're going to inspect all of the teeth on this, make sure that they're good. Check the back. When you go to work the back or grease it, you want to get to all sides and facets of this, get grease. Because everything touches something. The back touches the case. The front is what the oscillation gear, crosswind block slides on. And the teeth mesh with the main gear. Alright, I'm going to put the crosswind block back in. Remember the orientation. It was up and in and slides under that bar there, like that. If you had any questions, you go back to your pictures and take a look. Now we can pull up on that main gear a little bit, or the pinion gear, and insert the main gear. And I like to put the rotor on at this point, because that's going to hold the pinion gear. The rotor is held on by a keyway kind of a piece. So we'll get that on. This goes in on a normal tightness. In other words, tightening to the right side clockwise or away from you, for those of us that have the digital clocks. And we can bring the axle shaft down now. You had to put that rotor on before you put the axle shaft in. So here's your axle shaft comes in next. Align the flat spots of the axle shaft with the crosswind block. Go find your flat piece. I have one screw that's already in there. It decided it wasn't going to come out before. I got lucky, so actually it helps me. I don't do well with small pieces of screws, and in this case it kind of helped me self-align, didn't it? So I guess every now and then I get lucky. I reach into my parts tray for the next piece, and while I'm doing this, if you have a question on this reel or any reel in particular, and maybe you're stuck on something, well, go ahead and ask me that question, and leave it in the comment section. I will try to answer that for you. All right, just going to put some oil onto the bearing here. We'll close this case up. We'll see what we did. I know from the manual testing that we did fine with the anti-reverse. So this is just the balance of the service. So there's a couple of things that we mentioned in the service. You want to pull all the pieces apart. You want to inspect them, just like we inspected that anti-reverse dog. You want to change out any that are damaged, and there's a lot of parts still available for this reel. A lot of folks ask me where do you get the parts. Well, Penn sells them, but I've used mysticparts.com for years. They're a great service, and if you need the any Penn parts, they're an authorized Penn parts distributor. There's a felt ring in here that holds oil. So get that nice and wet. Go ahead and put the main drive back on here with the handle. And we can test it right at this point. Nice smooth operating reel with an anti-reverse. How do you like that? So I'm going to do one more thing here because we said we would go ahead and make this a kind of a full repair video. I'm going to check the drag washers here. Take the clip out. These should have HT100 drag washers in them, and it's all stacked up and ready to go. They're oiled. You don't need to oil them, but they're oiled. We're going to put that back in. It goes one drag washer. Then you have what's called a keyed washer. It has flat sides and a round shape to it. Then you have the second drag washer, and then you have this hex that fits in the slots that holds a spool when you tighten down the drags. The keyed ones hold the axle shaft, and he's ready to go. So Chris, you're all ready to go here. I did the video for this for you. As I mentioned, there's others out there. If I went too fast on this one in terms of the service, you can look in my library for another one of these. They are popular reels, and I do try to catalog these for folks that are looking for them. Here's another way. If you're stuck on the one in terms of the alignment of the washers, just turn it upside down. You have to clear that shoulder there. And this is your reel. So the last thing you would do is you would oil your bail. Just put a little bit in the seam of the trip arms, just to keep them there. If you had trouble with your bail, you're working in and out, but if you had trouble with your bail operating, then one of the things you would do is you would spray this with penetrating oil before removing anything. All right, let's tighten this down. We'll give it one more final test. And we'll let them know how we did. There you go. This has what I call the bang bail. It's going to come over. Oh, it doesn't have the bang bail. It's got a ramp in it. All right. So there you go. The Penn 450 SS, a little bit of the history, a little bit about where to find the schematics, a little bit about how to find the parts, a little bit on problem diagnosis. I hope you've enjoyed it all. Finally, if you have a reel that needs to be serviced and you're not up for doing it yourself, well, I service those by mail like I did here for Chris. And if you contact me by sending me an email, I will be happy to provide you with that repair information. So this is Dennis with Second Chance Tackle. Have a great day.